or why you might drink buffalo's milk, but not horse's milk. And again, have you ever wondered why you haven't wondered? For much of my life, I never wondered about these things. I mean, I grew up with a dog, who I told you about, who I loved, and I grew up eating meat and eggs and dairy. And I never thought, for so many years and so many meals, I never thought about how strange it was that I could pet my dog with one hand. Well, I ate a hot dog with the other. A hot dog that had once been an animal who was at least as sentient and as intelligent and as conscious as my dog. I never thought about the inconsistencies in my attitudes and behaviors toward animals. I just didn't make the connection between the meat, eggs, or dairy on my plate and the living being it once was or came from. For so much of my life, I had a gap in my consciousness. It wasn't until 1989, when I was 23 years old, and yes, you can do the math, I'm 52 now, that I stopped eating meat and eggs and dairy. And what happened was, it was not some animal rights decision I made. I actually got sick from eating a hamburger that had been contaminated, and I wound up in the hospital on intravenous antibiotics, and after that, I just couldn't eat meat again because I was disgusted by it. And so I began looking for information about my new diet, at the time, which was vegetarian, which of course led me to information about animal agriculture. And what I learned shocked and horrified me. I just couldn't believe what was happening all around me, but that I just hadn't been willing or ready to see. But what shocked me, perhaps even more, was that everybody I tried to talk to about what I was learning wasn't willing to hear what I had to say. They would say things like, "Don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal." Or sometimes they'd call me a crazy vegan hippie propagandist. So I became very curious as to how rational, compassionate people, just like myself, could just stop thinking and feeling when it came to this issue of eating animals. And this is what motivated me to do my research. I spent years conducting research, and I ultimately wrote my doctoral dissertation for my PhD in psychology on the psychology of eating meat. And this is what I discovered. There is an invisible belief system or ideology that conditions us to eat certain animals. We often assume that only vegans and vegetarians follow a belief system, right? But the only reason we learn to eat chickens but not dogs in certain cultures, for example, is because we do follow a belief system when it comes to eating animals. When eating animals is not a necessity for survival, which is true for many, though obviously not all people in the world today, then it's a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs. And I named this ideology carnism. You can think of carnism as the opposite of veganism. Now, carnism is a dominant ideology. That means it's invisible and it's woven through the very structure of society to shape norms, laws, beliefs, behaviors, and so forth. And it's also a violent ideology. Meat cannot be procured without violence, and egg and dairy production cause extensive harm to animals. And ideologies such as carnism run counter to core human values. Values such as compassion, ahimsa, and justice. Most people would never willingly support intensive, extensive, and completely unnecessary violence to other living beings. And yet most people do support this. And they do so in large part because carnism uses a set of psychological defense mechanisms. These defense mechanisms distort our thoughts and numb our feelings so that we act against our values and our caring for animals without even realizing what we're doing. Carnism teaches us how not to feel. It disconnects us from our natural empathy to the individuals who we have learned to classify as edible. Now, the main defense of carnism is denial. Denial is expressed largely through invisibility. One way carnism remains invisible is by remaining unnamed, so that eating animals is just a given. It's just the way things are. Another way carnism remains invisible is by keeping its victims out of sight and therefore conveniently out of public consciousness. So, for example, I'm going to have you guess the answer to this. 1.2 billion farmed animals are slaughtered globally. I'm going to have you guess how often?
Every week.
I haven't even shown you your choices yet. This does not include fish and other aquatic life, which would make this number about 5 times higher. So, every year? Every 6 months? Every month? Lots of people are saying week. There's no day option.
Every week.
Okay, if you guessed week, you guessed correctly. My slide is not moving. Okay. If you guessed week, you guessed correctly. But how many farmed animals have you seen, if you think about it? I mean, you see some cows walking around here, but a lot of people here in India still don't eat beef. But what about the chickens, for example? And the fish? If you think about it, most of us go through our entire lives seeing virtually nobody who becomes our food. In just 1 week, more farmed animals are slaughtered than the total number of people killed in all wars throughout history. And yet, most of us never see any part of this process. Of course, we don't see the animals who become our food, and the production of their eggs and dairy, because we're not supposed to. Most of them, in many places in the world now, and now more and more in India, are raised in factories. There are windowless sheds in remote locations. Here in India, what's been happening is that, once again, the West has exported its problems, and the West has been exporting its carnism. And so even, for example, dairy here in India, which has always been perceived and experienced as a sacred food, has become corrupted by Western carnistic practices. The West introduced an industrial model for dairy production that causes the production to be what I call carnistic dairy. It's dairy that is produced with a tremendous amount of himsa, a tremendous amount of violence. But most of us never hear about this. We never learn about this. And even though these animals, these individuals, are treated as units of production, they are sentient, intelligent beings. Pigs, which are not consumed that largely here, but some people do. I mean, pigs are considered to be more intelligent than dogs are. Some people have chickens for pets. Chickens who have been studied have been shown to exhibit altruistic behaviors where they actually will sacrifice themselves for others, other chickens. We know now, thanks to new scientific research, that fish, at least the species that were studied and some crustaceans, are sentient individuals who are far more complex, cognitively complex, than we could ever have imagined. And of course, cows are highly social beings, highly sentient beings that form lasting bonds with other cows and with their babies, who are taken away from them immediately after birth, creating massive trauma to the mother and child through dairy production. So I'm actually going to show you a short video right now. There's no blood involved, but it's a little bit difficult to see. It's not a highly graphic video, but it's a video from FIAPO that shares information about the dairy industry here in India. And it's important for the people in this room who are the pioneers in animal protection. You are the voice of the animals, the people sitting in this room, and you are the leaders of this new movement in a country that is starting to have a conversation about eating animals in an entirely new way right now. And it's incredibly important for awareness of carnism and meat production, and in particular dairy production, to be shared in this room. So this is a short video, it's about 4 minutes long. We'll come back after that.
Operation Flood, which was launched in the 1970s, was a project of the National Dairy Development Board and was one of the world's biggest dairy development programs. It transformed India from a milk-deficient nation into the world's largest milk producer. Investigated 451 dairies in 10 states, uncovering the painful lives of the dairy animals in India. This video narrates the results of this investigation.
Sorry, is somebody here who can manage the sound?
Which was launched in the 1970s, was a project of the National Dairy Development Board and was one of the world's biggest dairy development programs. It transformed India from a milk-deficient nation into the world's largest milk producer. IFA investigated 451 dairies in 10 states, uncovering the painful lives of the dairy animals in India. This video narrates the results of this investigation. In most dairies, calves are separated from their mothers almost instantly after birth. The mother and baby are not allowed any physical contact with each other. Male calves are considered useless from the moment they are born. They are usually left to die, also if they slaughter within 3 months of birth. In most dairies, the animals are forcefully impregnated through the process of artificial insemination within 3 months of giving birth by untrained staff in an extremely painful manner. Many dairies inject the hormone oxytocin into the dairy animals in order to increase the milk letdown. Apart from causing hormonal imbalance, oxytocin causes labor-like pain to the animal. Most dairies have cemented or brick floors which result in lameness, injuries and joint problems since bovines are land animals and require a soft surface for walking and resting. Dairies located in and around urban areas are usually overcrowded and the animals live in unhygienic conditions due to improper waste management, wounds, skin infections and instances of cattle slipping on their own excreta, resulting in fractures is a common sight in such practices cause immense mental and physical distress to the animal. In most studies, the dignity care is only provided in case of an emergency or when the animal is unable to produce milk. Most animals are neglected, leading to infections and diseases. Cow butcher is an effigy made by stuffing a dead calf with hay. Because of strong maternal bonds, the mother often stops lactating if the calf has died. Hence, a cow butcher is routinely used to meet the presence of the calf and continue milking.
Thank you for witnessing this very important, and thank you for FIAPO, thank you for producing this incredibly important video. So clearly, the animals pay dearly for our carnism. But animals are not the only victims of the system. Another invisible victim of carnism is our environment. According to the United Nations, animal agriculture is actually one of the most significant contributors to some of the most serious environmental problems facing the world today. And we are also invisible victims of carnism. We pay for our carnism with our health, as eating meat, eggs, and dairy has been connected with some of the most prevalent diseases in the world, prevalent lifestyle-induced diseases and dangers in the world today. Everything from heart disease to diabetes to various types of cancer have been linked with the consumption of animal products, of carnistic products. So we pay for our carnism with our health. And we also pay for our carnism with our hearts and with our minds. Now, I've talked about invisibility, which is the main defense of carnism. Another defense of carnism is justification. And the way that we learn to justify eating animals is by learning to believe that the myths of meat, eggs, and dairy are the facts of meat, eggs, and dairy. We learn to believe in what I call the 3 N's of justification. What do you think these are? Eating animals is?
Normal, natural, and
normal, natural,
and necessary.
And necessary. Haven't we heard this somewhere before? Slavery is normal, natural, and necessary. Male dominance is normal, natural, and necessary. Virtually all atrocities throughout human history have been justified by using these 3 N's. Now, a very a related myth is the protein myth, this idea that you have to eat animals' muscles in order to build your own muscles. A bodybuilder, a famous bodybuilder in Europe, Patrick Baboumian, said that's like thinking you have to eat animals' brains to get smarter. But this myth prevails, despite tremendous evidence to the contrary. In fact, did you know you could be strong enough to lift a car, even if you never ate any animal protein in your life? Really? And today, more and more professional athletes are actually adopting a vegan diet, not out of concern for animal welfare, not out of concern for the environment, but simply because so much evidence is mounting, an overwhelming body of evidence demonstrating that plant protein and a vegan diet is so much healthier for our bodies. Now, these myths of carnism are institutionalized. That means they are embraced and maintained by all of the major social institutions, from the family to the state. So when we study nutrition, for example, we actually are studying carnistic nutrition. And when we are born into a dominant system such as carnism, we inevitably internalize that system. In other words, we learn to look at the world through the lens of carnism. And carnism uses a set of defenses. These are cognitive distortions that distort our perception of meat, eggs, and dairy, and the animals we eat so that we can feel comfortable enough to consume them. So I'll just give you one example. Carnism teaches us to see animals, farmed animals, as abstractions, as lacking any individuality or any personality of their own. So we learn to believe, for example, that a pig is a pig and all pigs are the same. A chicken is a chicken and all chickens are the same. When we look at the world through the lens of carnism, we fail to see the absurdities of the system. So we see images like this, and we take no notice, rather than take no offense, but rather than take offense, or we laugh rather than cry. The philosopher Voltaire was right when he said, "If we believe absurdities, we shall commit atrocities." And carnism is but one of the many atrocities, one of the many violent ideologies that are an unfortunate part of the human legacy. And although the experience of each set of victims will always be unique, the ideologies themselves are similar. They're structurally similar because the mentality that enables the violence is the same. It's the mentality of domination and subjugation, of privilege and oppression. It's the mentality that causes us to turn someone into something, to reduce a life to a unit of production. It is the might makes right mentality that makes us feel entitled to wield complete control over the lives and deaths of those with less power, just because we can. And to feel justified in our actions because they're only savages, women, or animals. It is the mentality of meat. So eating animals is not simply a matter of personal ethics. It is the inevitable end result of a deeply entrenched, oppressive ism. Eating animals is therefore a social justice issue. And when we understand eating animals through the frame of carnism, we're in a much better position to get out of the carnistic box we may never have known we were in, and as leaders in a movement designed to protect animals, to open that box for others. So what's the solution then? Knowing what we know about the problem that is carnism, how can we help create a more compassionate and healthy world? Well, I'm going to address this question with another question for you, which is why? I mean, why do you think that we learn to use these carnistic defenses in the first place? What's the purpose? Why all the mental gymnastics? It takes a tremendous amount of psychological energy to stay blind to what's right in front of us. We only realize this once we've freed our minds from the stranglehold of this system. Why do we use defenses? What do you think?
Justify?
We justify it. Why justify it? You're right.
So that we don't have to deal with it. Block that.
We block it out. That's right. Because we care. This is true for the vast majority of human beings. Certainly for the people in this room. We care. We care about animals. We care about justice, which is fairness. We care about the truth. We care about compassion, ahimsa. So, incarnism depends on our not caring, and the entire system is built on deception. I have people who are veterinarians, people who are environmentalists, who still nevertheless personally participate in carnism. And these people care about animals. Of course they do. They care about their well-being. And yet we have all been so deeply conditioned by the system that it's almost impossible for us to see it. We're like fish in water who can't see the fact that we're wet. So our caring is both the problem and the solution. Our caring is what makes us want to turn away from the truth. And our caring is what gives us the courage to see the truth. And there's a lot of courage to see the truth in this room. And there's a lot of courage to speak the truth in this room. Our caring gives us the courage to bear witness. When we bear witness, we see the truth with our minds as well as with our hearts, so that when we make choices that impact another individual, we ask ourselves, what would he or she ask me to do? When we bear witness, we reconnect with our natural empathy. And there is good news. The vegan movement is the alternative to carnism. There is an alternative to carnism, and this movement, the vegan movement, is one of the fastest growing movements in the world. I told you I've been to 44 countries now. I haven't seen a single exception that this movement is growing. And there's more good news, which is that there are very practical, doable steps we can take to move beyond carnism, and I'll share just a couple of them with you. There are many. Obviously, we can reduce and ultimately eliminate our own consumption of meat, and as animal advocates, we can encourage that others do this as well. This does not mean we choose one species over another of who we want to protect. Obviously, our time is limited. I work for farmed animal protection because my ability to affect the number of individuals is much higher. When I advocate veganism or support vegan advocates, I can protect even more animals because the number of animals is so high who are being consumed. But we choose our causes, what's most important to us. We can still work to protect dogs and not eat animals in the process. We can still be ambassadors for veganism, even if we're not vegan activists ourselves. We can choose not to support carnistic dairy ourselves and raise awareness of others as well. Raise awareness among others as well. And this is in our own and personal lives. Again, this is a room of ambassadors. You are models. You are the models of what kind of a world you want to create for the animals living in it. People look to you as the models. Coming back to me and my story, coming full circle, this was, I always forget, 1980, when I painted this picture of me and Fritz. Some years later, 10 years later, as you might recall, Fritz was my first dog, and Fritz was also my first teacher. Fritz taught me that to respect someone is to respect that no matter how different from us they are, they have a life that matters to them. So Fritz taught me to be a witness. He taught me that love is a verb. And this is why the goal of my work here today, the goal of my life's work, is to raise awareness of this violent system that is carnism. Because for better or worse, we are all participants in this system. So our choice is not whether we participate, but rather how we participate. And with awareness, we have a choice. We can choose to be active witnesses to the transformation of carnism rather than passive bystanders. With awareness, we can choose to lead more authentic and freely chosen lives. And we can more fully become, as Gandhi himself said, the change that we wish to see. Thank you. We have 28 seconds for questions, so I don't think that's going to